I was checking the heart monitor in room 304 when the daughter-in-law walked in, looked at her unconscious mother-in-law lying in the hospital bed, and said to me with a cold smile, "How long until we can pull the plug? I have a closing on her house next Tuesday, and I need this wrapped up." My blood ran cold. My hand froze on the IV line I was adjusting, because Mrs. Eleanor Thompson wasn't dying. She wasn't even on life support. She was recovering from a stroke, making progress every single day. Her vitals were stable. Her physical therapist had just told me that morning that Eleanor had managed to squeeze a stress ball 3 times with her left hand, a small victory that had brought tears to the elderly woman's eyes. And here was her daughter-in-law, Victoria, standing in designer heels and a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, asking me when we could kill her. I turned to look at Victoria, forcing my face into a neutral expression, the kind of professional mask I'd perfected over decades of dealing with difficult family members. "Mrs. Thompson isn't on any life support, ma'am," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "She's recovering well. Dr. Patterson expects she'll be ready for rehabilitation within 2 weeks." Victoria's smile faltered for just a second, a crack in her carefully constructed facade. Then it was back, bright and false as a cubic zirconia. Of course. I just meant, hypothetically. If things took a turn. My husband is so worried about his mother suffering unnecessarily." Lies. I could smell them like I could smell the antiseptic in the air, the stale coffee from the nurse's station, the faint scent of Victoria's expensive perfume that was making my nose itch. In my 40 years as a nurse, I had developed an instinct for liars, for family members who wore concern like a costume while counting their inheritance in their heads. "Your husband," I said, keeping my tone light. "Robert, isn't it? I haven't seen him visit yet. Is he planning to come by soon?" Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "He's out of the country on business. Singapore. Very important meetings. I'm handling everything here." She pulled a leather-bound planner from her Louis Vuitton bag and made a show of flipping through it. "In fact, I have a meeting with Dr. Patterson this afternoon to discuss Eleanor's care plan. I have power of attorney, medical and financial." Of course she did. "I'm so glad you're here. If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed something in a hospital that didn't feel right? Share your experience below." I read every single one. Victoria left a few minutes later, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor, each step echoing down the corridor like a countdown. I stood there in room 304, my hands trembling slightly as I finished adjusting Eleanor's IV, and I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what Victoria Thompson was planning, and I was going to stop her. In my 4 decades at St. Luke's Medical Center here in Atlanta, Georgia, I thought I'd seen everything. I'd held the hands of dying patients, comforted grieving families, celebrated miraculous recoveries, and witnessed the full spectrum of human nature at its best and worst. But this case, the case of Eleanor Thompson and her daughter-in-law Victoria, would prove to be the most disturbing investigation I'd ever conducted. It all started 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in September 2018. I had just arrived for my shift at 7 a.m., the early morning sun streaming through the tall windows of St. Luke's lobby, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I loved this time of day, before the hospital fully woke up, when there was still a sense of calm before the inevitable chaos of emergencies, surgeries, and the endless parade of human suffering and hope that filled these walls. I had stopped at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor to review the night shift reports, my reading glasses perched on my nose as I scrolled through charts on the computer. That's when I first saw Eleanor Thompson's name. New admission. Room 304, 76-year-old female, ischemic stroke, right side paralysis, speech impairment. I had been assigned to her care. I remember walking down that familiar corridor toward room 304, my comfortable nursing shoes silent on the floor, passing rooms where other patients slept or watched morning television or waited for breakfast trays. The third floor was the medical surgical unit, where we handled everything from post-operative care to stroke recovery to cardiac monitoring. It was busy, demanding, and I loved it. When I entered room 304, Eleanor was awake, staring at the ceiling with those sharp gray eyes of hers. Even paralyzed, even unable to speak, there was an intelligence in her gaze that I recognized immediately. This wasn't a woman whose mind had been stolen by the stroke. This was a woman trapped in a body that wouldn't obey, screaming silently for help. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," I said with the warm smile I had perfected over the years, approaching her bed slowly so as not to startle her. "My name is Sharon Williams, and I'm going to be your nurse today. I'm going to take care of you, all right?" Her eyes tracked me as I moved around the room, checking her IV, adjusting the oxygen cannula in her nose, reviewing the monitors that beeped softly beside her bed. Her heart rate was steady, blood pressure slightly elevated but not dangerously so, oxygen saturation good. All signs pointed to a woman who was stable, who could recover with proper care and rehabilitation. I had seen hundreds of stroke patients over my career. I knew the ones who would fight, and I knew the ones who had already given up. Eleanor Thompson was a fighter. I could see it in the way her left hand, the one that still had mobility, kept clenching and unclenching on the white hospital blanket, as if she were testing it, making sure it still worked, preparing for the long battle ahead. "Mrs. Thompson," I said gently, pulling a chair close to her bedside and sitting down. This was something I had learned early in my nursing career. Never tower over a patient. Get down to their level. Make them feel like you have time for them, even when you have 6 other patients waiting for medication and a new admission coming in 20 minutes. "I'm going to ask you some questions. If you can understand me, I want you to squeeze my hand. Can you do that?" I placed my hand in hers and immediately felt a response. Her fingers closed around mine with surprising strength. Once. Twice. 3 times. "Excellent," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "That's very good, Mrs. Thompson. Now, I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions. Squeeze once for yes, twice for no, all right? 1 squeeze. Yes. Are you in pain? 2 squeezes. No. Can you feel your right side at all? 2 squeezes. No. Do you understand what happened to you? That you had a stroke? 1 squeeze. Yes. I continued the assessment, establishing a baseline for her cognitive function, her awareness, her ability to communicate. With each question, I became more convinced that Eleanor Thompson's mind was sharp, intact, imprisoned in a body that had betrayed her. It was one of the cruelest situations I encountered in my work, watching someone fully aware, but unable to express themselves, unable to move, unable to live independently. "Mrs. Thompson," I said, after we'd finished the basic questions, "I want you to know that stroke recovery is possible. It's going to take time, it's going to take work, but I've seen patients with injuries like yours regain significant function. The physical therapist will be by later today to start assessment. The speech therapist will come tomorrow. We're going to help you get better. Do you understand?" 1 strong squeeze. Yes. And then something else. Her eyes filled with tears, and they began rolling down her temples into her silver hair that was spread across the pillow. Not tears of sadness, I thought, but tears of relief. Someone had finally told her there was hope. I spent the next hour with her, much longer than I should have given my other patients. But something about Eleanor had grabbed my heart. I talked to her about the weather, about the flowers someone had sent that were sitting on her windowsill, pale pink roses that filled the room with a gentle fragrance. I told her about my own life, how I had been a nurse for 40 years, how I had worked at St. Luke's since 1978, when it was still a small community hospital before all the expansions and renovations. "I've seen this place grow," I told her, adjusting her pillows to make her more comfortable. "I've seen medicine change. When I started, we didn't have half the technology we have now. But you know what hasn't changed? The most important part of healing isn't the machines or the medications. It's the will to fight. And Mrs. Thompson, I can see you're a fighter. One squeeze. That first day, I met Eleanor's son Robert for the first time, though it was only briefly. He had come by during visiting hours, a tall, lean man in his early 40s with the same gray eyes as his mother. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his suit wrinkled, his face drawn with worry. "How is she?" he asked me in the hallway outside room 304, his voice low and strained. "She's stable," I told him honestly. "The stroke was significant, but her vital signs are good. She's aware, she understands what's happening. That's actually a very positive sign." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Thank God. I was so scared when I got the call. I thought I was going to lose her." He paused, then added, "My wife Victoria is handling most of the coordination with the doctors. I have to fly to Singapore tomorrow for business. It's horrible timing, but these meetings have been scheduled for months. I can't cancel them." "I understand," I said, though privately, I thought it was strange to leave the country when your mother had just had a stroke. But I didn't know their situation. Maybe the meetings really were that important. Maybe Victoria really was capable of handling things. I had no reason to doubt it yet. "Victoria will keep me updated," Robert continued, running his hand through his hair. "She's been amazing through all of this, taking care of the insurance paperwork, talking to the doctors, making sure Mom has everything she needs. I don't know what I'd do without her." I smiled and nodded, making a mental note of his words. At the time, they seemed like the ordinary gratitude of a husband for a supportive wife. Later, they would take on a much darker meaning. Over the next week, I watched Eleanor make small but steady progress. The physical therapist, an energetic young woman named Jessica, worked with her daily, helping her relearn basic movements. By day 3, Eleanor could lift her left arm above her head. By day 5, she could squeeze a stress ball. By day 7, she was managing to form simple sounds, though actual words were still beyond her reach. I documented everything meticulously in her chart, as I always did. But I also started keeping a small personal notebook, something I had done throughout my career for patients I felt particularly connected to. In it, I wrote observations that didn't belong in an official medical chart. The way Eleanor's face lit up when her favorite nurse's aide, a sweet girl named Maria, came to give her a bed bath. The way she got frustrated during physical therapy but never gave up. The way she always tried to smile at me, even though half her face wouldn't cooperate. And I wrote about Victoria. Victoria Thompson visited her mother-in-law exactly 3 times that first week. Each visit lasted approximately 15 to 20 minutes. She never brought flowers or personal items from home. She never held Eleanor's hand or spoke to her with any warmth. Instead, she stood by the window, on her phone, occasionally glancing at Eleanor as if checking whether she was still breathing. I tried not to judge. Some people aren't comfortable in hospitals. Some people don't know how to handle illness or disability. Some people express love differently. But there was something about the way Victoria looked at Eleanor, a coldness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The 3rd time Victoria visited, I made sure I was in the room, adjusting Eleanor's IV when she arrived. I wanted to observe their interaction more closely. "Hello, Eleanor," Victoria said, not moving from the doorway. Her voice was flat, perfunctory. "How are you feeling today?" Eleanor couldn't answer, of course. Her eyes tracked to Victoria, and I saw her left hand clench on the blanket. "The doctor says you're making progress," Victoria continued, still not approaching the bed. "That's good. Robert will be happy to hear it. He's been so worried about you." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "We all have." I watched Eleanor's face. The left side, the part that still responded to her brain's commands, was tense, the corner of her mouth turned down. Her heart rate on the monitor ticked up slightly. 72, 75, 78. "Oh, and I've been handling your mail," Victoria said, examining her manicured nails. "Lots of bills, of course. I'll make sure everything gets paid. You don't need to worry about any of that. Just focus on getting better." Something about the way she said that last part, Just focus on getting better sounded more like a threat than encouragement, as if Eleanor needed permission to recover, as if Victoria would rather she didn't. Mrs. Thompson needs her rest, I interjected, my voice professionally pleasant but firm. Perhaps you could visit again tomorrow when she's had more sleep. Victoria's eyes snapped to me, and for just a moment I saw irritation flash across her face before she smoothed it away. Of course. I have a very busy schedule anyway. I'll check in soon, Eleanor. She left without kissing her mother-in-law goodbye, without even touching her. Eleanor's heart rate gradually returned to normal after Victoria was gone, but I noticed tears sliding down her face again. I took her hand. Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right? Are you sad about something? 2 squeezes. No, not sad. Are you scared? 1 squeeze. Yes. Scared about your recovery? About the stroke? 2 squeezes. No. Scared about something else? 1 squeeze. Yes. I leaned closer, keeping my voice low even though we were alone. Are you scared of someone? Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. 1 squeeze, long and hard. Yes. Your daughter-in-law? Victoria? 1 squeeze, and then her hands started shaking in mine, and more tears came, and I knew. I knew something was very wrong. That night, after my shift ended at 7 p.m., I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the Atlanta skyline glowing in the distance, and I thought about Eleanor Thompson. I thought about the fear in her eyes. I thought about Victoria's cold visits. I thought about Robert flying off to Singapore while his mother lay recovering from a stroke. I should have gone home. I should have trusted that if there was really a problem, someone else would notice. The doctors, the social workers, the case managers. It wasn't my job to get involved beyond providing medical care. But I had been a nurse for 40 years. And in those 40 years, I had learned that sometimes the medical care was the easy part. Sometimes the real danger to a patient didn't come from their illness or injury. It came from the people who were supposed to love them. I started my car and drove to my small apartment in Midtown, the radio playing softly, my mind already working through possibilities. I would watch Victoria more carefully. I would document everything. And if I found evidence that Eleanor was in danger, I would act. I had no idea how dark this case would become. I had no idea that within 2 weeks I would be hiding in a supply closet, eavesdropping on a murder plot. I had no idea that I would break rules I had never broken in my entire career. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eleanor Thompson had squeezed my hand and told me she was scared, and I was not going to ignore that. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early, before my official shift started. I wanted to review Eleanor's chart more thoroughly, to look for anything I might have missed. The 3rd floor was quiet, just the night shift nurses finishing up their rounds and the breakfast trays beginning to arrive from the kitchen. I logged into the computer at the nurses' station and pulled up Eleanor's file. Date of birth, March 15th, 1942. That made her 76 years old. Admitted September 11th, 2018 at 6:47 a.m. via ambulance. Next of kin, Robert Thompson, son. Emergency contact, Victoria Thompson, daughter-in-law. I scrolled through her medical history. Generally healthy for her age. No diabetes, no heart disease. Controlled hypertension with medication. A minor heart incident 2 years ago. Nothing serious. And then I saw it. A notation from 2 years prior, when Eleanor had been admitted for that heart scare. Patient signed medical power of attorney. Documentation on file. POA holder, Victoria Thompson. I sat back in my chair processing this information. 2 years ago, Eleanor had given Victoria power of attorney for medical decisions. Probably when she was scared about the heart issue, wanting to make sure someone could make decisions if she couldn't. A reasonable precaution. Many elderly people did this. But combined with Victoria's behavior, with Eleanor's fear, this took on a much more sinister meaning. If Victoria had power of attorney, she could make decisions about Eleanor's care. She could refuse treatments. She could request that life support be withdrawn, if it came to that. She could essentially decide whether Eleanor lived or died. I needed to know more about Victoria Thompson. I needed to understand what kind of person she was, what she wanted, what she was capable of. I spent the next several days watching and listening. In a hospital, information flows like water if you know how to pay attention. Nurses gossip at the station. Families talk in waiting rooms. Doctors make offhand comments. And patients, when they can speak, tell you everything if you just take the time to listen. I learned that Robert Thompson was the CFO of a mid-sized tech company. Good salary, comfortable life, but not wealthy by Atlanta's Buckhead standards where they lived. I learned that Victoria hadn't worked since she married Robert 12 years ago. I learned they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, both in private school. And I learned, from a conversation I overheard between 2 case managers in the break room, that Eleanor Thompson owned property. Quite a bit of property. The social worker is trying to figure out the discharge plan, one of them was saying, stirring sugar into her coffee. Apparently, Mrs. Thompson owns her house outright, plus 2 rental properties. But the daughter-in-law is saying they should sell everything to pay for a nursing home. Sell? The other one replied. Why sell? If she owns property, she has assets. She could do home care, live-in help. That's what I said. But the daughter-in-law insists that Mrs. Thompson would want to be in a facility, says it's what's best for everyone. Best for everyone. I thought about that phrase as I made my rounds that morning. Best for everyone or best for Victoria? I decided to talk to Eleanor directly about this using our yes-no communication system. During my afternoon break, I went to room 304 and closed the door, something I rarely did. But I needed privacy for this conversation. Mrs. Thompson, I said, pulling my chair close to her bedside, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? 1 squeeze. Yes. Do you own your house? 1 squeeze. Yes. Do you own other property too? Rental property? 1 squeeze. Yes. Did you ever talk to Victoria about selling your property? 2 squeezes. No. Does Victoria know about your property? 1 squeeze. Yes. Has she talked to you about it since you've been in the hospital? 1 squeeze. Yes. And then Eleanor's hand started shaking again. That tremor that I had learned meant she was distressed. Did she ask you to sign something? 1 squeeze. Yes. Strong. Did you sign it? 2 squeezes. No. Did she get angry when you wouldn't sign? 1 squeeze. Yes. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. This was elder abuse, financial exploitation. And Victoria was doing it while Eleanor was vulnerable, recovering from a stroke, unable to speak or defend herself. Mrs. Thompson, I said carefully, I want to help you, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. Is Victoria trying to take your property? 1 squeeze. And then Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again, and she made a sound, a desperate, frustrated sound that was trying to be words but couldn't quite form them. Me. She was trying to say, my money, or my house, or maybe my son. I couldn't be sure. But the meaning was clear. Victoria was after Eleanor's estate. That night, I did something I had never done in my entire career. I called Adult Protective Services. I sat at my kitchen table, my phone in my hand, looking at the number I had found online. The apartment was dark except for the small lamp over the table. My cat, Oscar, rubbed against my legs, sensing my agitation. Outside, I could hear the sounds of Atlanta traffic, sirens in the distance, the city's endless rhythm. If I made this call, I would be crossing a line. I would be involving outside authorities in a family matter based on nothing more than a patient's hand squeezes and my own instincts. I could be wrong. Victoria might have perfectly legitimate reasons for her behavior. Robert might have given her full authority to handle his mother's affairs. I might be overreacting. But then I remembered Eleanor's eyes, the fear in them, the way her heart rate spiked every time Victoria entered the room. The tears that came when she tried to tell me what was happening. I dialed the number. Adult Protective Services, this is Denise speaking. How can I help you? My name is Sharon Williams, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'm a nurse at St. Luke's Medical Center, and I need to report a potential case of elder abuse. I spent the next 30 minutes explaining the situation, giving Denise all the information I had. Eleanor's name, her room number, the dates of Victoria's visits, Eleanor's clear communication that she was scared, the conversation about property, the power of attorney. Denise listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes. Ms. Williams, she said when I was finished, I appreciate you calling this in. However, I need to be honest with you. Unless the patient can verbally confirm abuse, or unless we have clear evidence of financial exploitation or physical harm, our hands are somewhat tied. A daughter-in-law having power of attorney isn't unusual. Discussions about property and long-term care aren't unusual. Even the patient being uncomfortable with family members isn't unusual. But she's scared, I insisted. She told me she's scared. By squeezing your hand, Denise said gently. Which, while I believe you, wouldn't hold up as testimony. A stroke patient's cognitive ability can be questioned in court. Their communication methods can be challenged. I felt frustration rising. So what can you do? I can open a case file, Denise replied. I can send someone to interview Mrs. Thompson to assess the situation. But unless we find something concrete, something we can prove, there's not much more we can do. My advice to you? Document everything. Every visit, every conversation you overhear, every time the patient seems distressed. If this is real, if Victoria Thompson is really trying to exploit her mother-in-law, she'll make a mistake. And when she does, we'll be ready. I hung up feeling both relieved and disappointed. At least there was now an official record. At least someone else knew. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. 3 days later, exactly 1 week after my conversation with Eleanor about her property, Dr. Patterson called me into his office. I had been expecting this. Word travels fast in hospitals, and I knew that my call to Adult Protective Services would eventually make its way back to the administration. I wasn't in trouble exactly, but I needed to explain myself. Dr. Patterson was a good man, mid-50s, graying at the temples, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. We had worked together for over 15 years, and I respected him immensely. He gestured for me to sit down. Sharon, he said, closing the door. I got a call this morning from Victoria Thompson's attorney. My stomach dropped. Her attorney? Yes. Apparently, Adult Protective Services contacted Mrs. Thompson, and she immediately called her lawyer. The lawyer called the hospital, claiming harassment. He says you've been making accusations against his client without any evidence, that you've been upsetting Mrs. Thompson with inappropriate questions, and that you're interfering in private family matters. I took a deep breath. Dr. Patterson, I reported suspected elder abuse. That's not only my right, it's my obligation under Georgia law. I know that, he said, holding up his hand. And I support you 100%. I told the lawyer exactly that. But Sharon, he's threatening to file a complaint with the state nursing board. He's talking about restraining orders to keep you away from Eleanor Thompson. This could get ugly. Let it get ugly, I said, surprised by the fierceness in my own voice. That patient squeezed my hand and told me she was scared. She told me Victoria tried to make her sign something and got angry when she refused. She can't speak, Dr. Patterson. She can't defend herself. If I don't stand up for her, who will? Dr. Patterson studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. But we need to be smart about this. We need to document everything, build a real case. I'm going to formally request a psychiatric evaluation for Mrs. Thompson to assess her cognitive status and her ability to communicate. That way, we'll have professional documentation of whether she's competent to make her own decisions." "Victoria won't like that," I said. "Victoria doesn't have a choice," Dr. Patterson replied. "As the attending physician, I can order evaluations that I deem medically necessary. And I'm also going to request a social work consult to evaluate the family dynamics and discharge planning. In the meantime, Sharon, I want you to continue providing excellent care to Mrs. Thompson. But be very, very careful. Don't discuss property or finances with her anymore. Don't make any accusations. Just do your job and document anything unusual." I agreed. But inside, I was thinking that being careful wasn't going to be enough. Victoria now knew that someone was watching her. She knew that Adult Protective Services was involved. If she was really planning something, she would either back off or she would move faster. And I was betting on the latter. I was right. That Sunday afternoon, my day off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to relax, tried to watch television, tried to read a book. But Eleanor Thompson's face kept appearing in my mind, those gray eyes, that desperate squeeze of my hand. At 2 p.m., I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I told myself I was just going to check on her, make sure she was all right. The weekend nursing staff was good, competent, but they didn't know Eleanor like I did. They wouldn't notice if something was off. The third floor was quiet when I arrived. Sunlight streamed through the windows at the end of the corridor, casting long shadows. I could hear a television playing in one room, a family laughing in another. Normal Sunday afternoon sounds. I walked toward room 304, and that's when I heard the voices. They were coming from the small family consultation room, the one we used when doctors needed to have serious conversations with families about prognosis or end-of-life decisions. The door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch, enough that voices carried into the hallway. I recognized Victoria's voice immediately. She was talking to someone, her tone hushed but urgent, the way people talk when they're discussing something they don't want overheard. I knew I should keep walking. I knew this was none of my business, that I was on thin ice already with Victoria's lawyer threatening complaints. But something made me stop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was my 40 years of experience telling me that this conversation was important. Maybe it was just stubborn determination to protect a patient who couldn't protect herself. I pressed myself against the wall, just out of sight of the doors opening, and I listened. "I don't care what the doctor says," Victoria was saying. "The longer she stays alive, the more complicated this becomes. My lawyer says if she recovers enough to revoke the power of attorney, we're screwed." A man's voice responded, older and gruff. "What about Robert? When is he supposed to be back?" Victoria laughed, and the sound sent chills down my spine. It was cold, calculating, devoid of any warmth. "Robert doesn't know anything. He thinks he's in Singapore for business meetings, which he is. He has no idea I'm handling things here. By the time he gets back, it'll all be done. The house will be sold, the accounts will be transferred, and his dear mother will have peacefully passed away in her sleep." I stopped breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid they could hear it through the wall. This wasn't just about elder abuse or financial exploitation. This was about murder. "And you're sure the power of attorney is ironclad?" the man asked. "Completely," Victoria replied. "I had Eleanor sign it 2 years ago when she had that little heart scare. Told her it was just a precaution, that Robert and I would make sure she was taken care of if anything happened. She trusted me then. Stupid old woman." The venom in her voice was unmistakable. "She's been sitting on a $5 million estate, living in that big house all by herself, holding on to those rental properties like she's some kind of real estate mogul. $5 million, Frank. That's what we're talking about. $5 million. That's what Eleanor Thompson's life was worth to Victoria. That's why she was so eager to discuss pulling the plug, why she was so cold during her visits, why she had tried to get Eleanor to sign more papers." "What about the nurse?" Frank asked. "The black one who's always hovering around?" I stiffened, my fists clenching at my sides. Victoria scoffed. Sharon? She's nothing. Just an old nurse counting down the days to retirement. She might suspect something, but what can she do? She has no authority here. Once I convinced Dr. Patterson that keeping Eleanor alive is prolonging her suffering, that it's cruel to make her live like this, he'll have to comply. And if he doesn't, I'll threaten a lawsuit for emotional distress. These hospitals are terrified of litigation. You've thought of everything, Frank said, admiration clear in his voice. Of course I have, Victoria replied. I've been planning this for 2 years, Frank. Ever since Eleanor mentioned she was thinking about changing her will, leaving most of her estate to some scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. Can you imagine? Throwing away $5 million on strangers when her own family needs it? When Robert and I have been struggling to make ends meet, paying for private school, keeping up with the mortgage on that house in Buckhead? Struggling to make ends meet. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Victoria's handbag cost more than most people's monthly salary. So what's the plan? Frank asked. Simple, Victoria said. I keep pressuring the doctor to increase the morphine for pain management. I've been telling him that Eleanor seems to be suffering, that she moans at night, that she seems uncomfortable. Once the morphine is high enough, her respiratory system will slow down naturally. It'll look like a complication from the stroke. Happens all the time with elderly patients. No one will question it. Oh God. She was planning to essentially overdose Eleanor with morphine, making it look like a natural decline. It was brilliant in its simplicity and absolutely evil. When? Frank asked. Soon, Victoria replied. Robert gets back from Singapore on Friday. I need this done by Thursday night at the latest. I'll come in late, after the night shift nurse has settled in. I'll tell them I couldn't sleep, wanted to sit with my mother-in-law. They'll think it's sweet. And then I'll make sure Eleanor gets a little extra help sleeping permanently. Thursday night. That was in 4 days. I heard movement inside the room, the scraping of chairs. They were getting up. They were leaving. And here I was, standing right outside the door, like a fool. I looked around frantically. The hallway stretched in both directions, too far to run without being seen. The nurse's station was 40 feet away, too far. My mind raced through options in the split second I had. Then I saw it. A supply closet, door slightly ajar, just 3 feet to my left. I moved without thinking, slipping inside and pulling the door almost closed, leaving just a crack to see through. My breath sounded impossibly loud in the small space, ragged and panicked. Could they hear it? The closet smelled of disinfectant and latex gloves, familiar hospital scents that usually comforted me, but now only amplified my anxiety. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Sweat beaded on my forehead, despite the air conditioning. I pressed myself back against the shelves of supplies, making myself as small as possible in the cramped space. Through the narrow opening, I watched Victoria emerge first, smoothing down her designer dress, her face a perfect mask of composure. No one looking at her would guess she had just been plotting murder. She looked like any other concerned family member visiting a sick relative. Frank followed, and I got my first clear look at him. Mid-50s, expensive suit, leather briefcase, the kind of shoes that probably cost $1,000. A lawyer, obviously, Victoria's lawyer, her accomplice. They stood in the hallway for a moment, so close to my hiding place that I could have reached out and touched them. I held my breath, not daring to move, my muscles locked in place. Call me when it's done, Frank said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby. I will, Victoria replied. This time next week, I'll be a very wealthy woman. Well, Robert will be technically, but what's his is mine. She smiled, that cold smile I had seen before. And the best part? He'll never know. He'll think his mother just slipped away peacefully, and he'll be grateful I was here to hold her hand at the end. They turned and walked down the hallway, their footsteps fading. I waited, counting seconds in my head, my legs cramping from standing so still in the confined space. 10 seconds, 20, 30. What if they had forgotten something? What if they came back? 45 seconds. A minute. Finally, when I was sure they were gone, when I couldn't hear their voices or footsteps anymore, I emerged from the closet on shaking legs. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely pull my phone from my pocket. I had to call someone, Dr. Patterson, the police. Someone in authority who could stop this. But as I stood there in that empty corridor, my mind racing, I realized something crucial. I had no proof. Everything I had just heard was hearsay. I was hiding in a closet, eavesdropping on a private conversation. Any lawyer worth his salt would have it thrown out. Victoria would claim I misheard, that I was making it up, that I had a vendetta against her. And meanwhile, in 4 days, Eleanor Thompson would be dead. No, I needed proof. Real, solid, undeniable proof. I walked to the nurse's station, forcing my breathing to slow down, forcing my hands to stop shaking. The weekend charge nurse, a woman named Patricia, looked up from her computer. "Sharon? I didn't know you were working today." "I'm not," I said, managing a smile. "I just came by to check on Mrs. Thompson in 304. I've been worried about her." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "She's doing okay, vital signs stable. Physical therapy came by this morning. No visitors today, which is probably good. She needs rest." "Has Victoria Thompson been by recently? The daughter-in-law?" "Not today," Patricia said. "But she called about an hour ago, asking about Eleanor's pain management. Said she thought her mother-in-law seemed uncomfortable during her last visit, asked if we could increase the morphine." My blood ran cold. It was starting. Victoria was laying the groundwork, planting the idea that Eleanor needed more pain medication. "What did you tell her?" I asked carefully. "I said I'd note it in the chart for Dr. Patterson to review," Patricia replied. "But honestly, Sharon, Mrs. Thompson doesn't seem to be in pain. She hasn't been requesting medication. Her facial expressions don't indicate distress. I don't know what Victoria is seeing." "Maybe Victoria is seeing what she wants to see," I said quietly. Patricia gave me an odd look, but didn't pursue it. I thanked her and walked to room 304, my mind working through possible plans, possible ways to protect Eleanor, to stop Victoria, to gather the evidence I needed. Eleanor was awake when I entered, her eyes tracking to me as I approached the bed. I pulled the privacy curtain around us, enclosing us in our own small world. "Mrs. Thompson," I whispered, taking her hand, "I need to tell you something very serious. Can you stay calm for me?" One squeeze. "Yes." "I overheard a conversation today. Victoria was talking to her lawyer. Mrs. Thompson, she's planning to hurt you. She wants your property, your money, and she's planning to do something that would end your life and make it look like a complication from your stroke." Eleanor's eyes went wide, and her grip on my hand became almost painfully tight. Her heart rate monitor started climbing. 75, 80, 85. "I know you're scared," I said quickly, "but I need you to trust me. I'm going to stop her. I promise you, I won't let her hurt you. But I need your help. I need evidence. I need proof that she's been pressuring you, trying to get you to sign documents. Can you help me with that?" One squeeze. "Yes," strong and determined. "Good," I said, "because here's what we're going to do." For the next 20 minutes, I explained my plan to Eleanor. It was risky, possibly illegal, and definitely outside the bounds of normal nursing practice. But I couldn't see any other way. I would set up my personal phone in Eleanor's room, hidden on a shelf behind some books, recording video. Victoria couldn't resist coming back, especially now that she had convinced herself she was so close to success. And when she did, when she tried to pressure Eleanor again or tried to tamper with her medication, I would have evidence. "I'll check the recording every day," I told Eleanor. "And the moment we have something solid, something that proves Victoria's intentions, I'll take it to the police. In the meantime, I'm going to talk to Dr. Patterson about moving you to a different room. Maybe putting you under closer observation. We'll say it's for your own safety, for better monitoring." Eleanor squeezed my hand, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Hope. That night, I went home and couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, going over everything I had heard, everything I knew, trying to find any other solution that didn't involve me basically spying on a patient's family member. But there was no other solution. Victoria had a lawyer. She had power of attorney. She had everything positioned perfectly to get away with murder, and she was going to do it in 4 days. On Monday morning, I arrived at the hospital an hour early and went straight to Dr. Patterson's office. I told him everything, the conversation I had overheard, Victoria's plan, the timeline. I expected him to be skeptical, to tell me I was overreacting, to remind me about patient privacy and family rights. Instead, he listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every sentence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face. "This is serious, Sharon," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, this is attempted murder. We need to involve the police." "We don't have proof," I reminded him. "It's my word against hers, and she has a lawyer who's already threatened to file complaints against me." "Then we get proof," Dr. Patterson said firmly. "You said you have a plan?" I told him about the hidden camera in Eleanor's room. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "That's potentially a violation of privacy laws, but given the circumstances, given that we're trying to prevent a crime, I'll take responsibility if it comes to that. Do it. Set up the camera, and in the meantime, I'm going to have security put a discreet watch on room 304. No one goes in or out without us knowing about it." "Victoria will notice," I said. "Let her notice," Dr. Patterson replied. "Maybe it'll make her back off. And if it doesn't, if she's arrogant enough to try something anyway, we'll catch her in the act." But Victoria was smarter than we gave her credit for. Over the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, she didn't visit at all. She called the nurses' station multiple times, always asking the same questions. How was Eleanor doing? Was she still in pain? Had Dr. Patterson considered increasing her morphine? But she didn't come to the hospital. My hidden camera recorded nothing but Eleanor sleeping, watching television, working with physical therapists. Useful for showing her progress, but useless for proving Victoria's intentions. By Wednesday night, I was starting to panic. Tomorrow was Thursday, the day Victoria had mentioned to her lawyer Frank, the day she planned to come in late, after the night shift settled in, and help Eleanor sleep permanently. I stayed late that Wednesday, well past the end of my shift, sitting at the nurse's station and watching room 304. The night shift nurse, a competent young man named Derek, had been briefed by Dr. Patterson about the situation. He knew to watch for Victoria, to alert us immediately if she showed up. At 11:00 p.m., Dr. Patterson called me at the nurse's station. "Sharon, go home. You can't stay there all night. Derek knows what to do. And I've arranged for a security guard to be stationed in the hallway, out of sight, but close enough to respond if needed." "What if she comes?" I asked. "Then we'll catch her," Dr. Patterson said. "Trust the plan, Sharon. Go home and get some rest. Tomorrow might be a very long day." Reluctantly, I left. I drove home through the quiet Atlanta streets, the city's nightlife still bustling in certain neighborhoods, but my route taking me through quieter residential areas. I thought about Eleanor, alone in that hospital room, vulnerable and voiceless. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the clock. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 2:47 a.m., my phone rang. It was Derek. "Sharon, you need to come back, now. Something's wrong with Mrs. Thompson." I was out of bed and dressed in 2 minutes, driving back to the hospital with my heart in my throat, breaking every speed limit. What had happened? Had Victoria come? Had I been wrong about Thursday night? When I burst through the doors of the 3rd floor, I could hear alarms blaring from room 304. I ran down the corridor, my comfortable nursing shoes pounding against the floor, and found Derek, Dr. Patterson, who must have gotten the same call, and 2 other nurses working frantically over Eleanor. Her oxygen saturation was dropping. Her heart rate was erratic. She was struggling to breathe, her one mobile hand clawing at her oxygen line as if it were suffocating her rather than helping her. "What happened?" I demanded, pushing into the room and immediately starting to assess her. "I don't know," Derek said, his voice shaking. "I checked on her at 2:30, and she was fine. Sleeping peacefully. I went to check on my other patients, came back at 2:45, and found her like this. I called the code immediately. I looked at her IV line, and my blood turned to ice. The bag looked normal, the drip rate was correct, but there was something off. The fluid level seemed lower than it should have been at this time of night, and there was a small puncture mark near the port that I didn't remember seeing before. "Dr. Patterson," I said urgently, pointing at the IV bag. "Someone's tampered with this. Something's been injected into her line." He looked where I was pointing, and his face went white. "Get that bag down now," he ordered. "Start a new line with fresh fluids, and someone call the lab. I want that bag tested for foreign substances immediately." The next hour was a blur of activity. We stabilized Eleanor, counteracting whatever had been injected into her IV with medications to support her heart and lungs. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, her vitals began to improve. Her oxygen saturation climbed back up. Her heart rate steadied. She wasn't going to die, not tonight. But someone had tried to kill her. At 4 a.m., when Eleanor was finally stable and resting comfortably, Dr. Patterson, Derek, and I stood in the hallway outside room 304, exhausted and shaken. "Where was the security guard?" I asked Derek. "There was supposed to be someone watching." Derek's face flushed. "He was there. He said he stepped away for maybe 2 minutes to use the bathroom. That's all. 2 minutes. 2 minutes was all Victoria needed. She had planned it perfectly, waiting for that small window of opportunity, sneaking in while Derek was with his other patients, injecting something into Eleanor's IV, and leaving before anyone noticed. "We need to call the police," I said. "This is attempted murder. We have to—" "We have nothing," Dr. Patterson interrupted, his voice heavy with frustration. "We have a patient who had a medical emergency that we stabilized. We have an IV bag that might show evidence of tampering when the lab analyzes it, but we have no proof of who did it. The security guard didn't see anyone. The camera you set up didn't catch anyone because they came in from the angle it wasn't covering. Victoria could claim she was home in bed, and who could prove otherwise?" He was right, and I knew it. But the rage I felt was almost overwhelming. Victoria had come here, had tried to kill Eleanor, and was going to get away with it. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice breaking. Dr. Patterson looked at me, then at Derek, then back at Eleanor's room where she lay sleeping, unaware of how close she had come to death. "We try something desperate," he said. "We let her think she succeeded." The idea was audacious and probably violated a dozen hospital policies and ethical guidelines. But we were out of options and out of time. We would tell everyone that Eleanor Thompson had passed away at 3:15 a.m. from complications related to her stroke. We would move her to a private room on a different floor under a false name with round-the-clock protection. And we would wait for Victoria to make her next move, because Victoria would make a next move. She had to. She had power of attorney, she had access to Eleanor's accounts and property, and with Eleanor dead, nothing would stand in her way, except us. By 8 a.m., word had spread through the hospital that Mrs. Eleanor Thompson in room 304 had passed away during the night. The death certificate was never actually filed. It was a fake document that Dr. Patterson had a trusted colleague in the coroner's office prepare, but to everyone at St. Luke's who wasn't part of our small conspiracy, Eleanor was dead. Eleanor herself was very much alive, tucked away in a private room on the 5th floor under the name Jane Smith. She had been briefed on what was happening, had squeezed my hand in agreement with the plan, and now waited to see what would come next. Victoria arrived at the hospital at 11:01 a.m. I watched her from a distance as she approached the 3rd-floor nurses' station, where Patricia was working again. "I'm here to see Eleanor Thompson," Victoria said, her voice pitched perfectly to sound like a concerned daughter-in-law. She was wearing black, I noticed. She had dressed for the occasion. Patricia's face fell into an expression of sympathy. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I thought someone had called you. Your mother-in-law passed away early this morning. She had some complications, and despite our best efforts..." Victoria's reaction was Academy Award worthy. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widened in shock, and she made a small gasping sound. "What? No. Oh my God. When? How?" "Around 3:15 a.m., Patricia said gently. "It was peaceful. She didn't suffer." For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw Victoria's mouth twitch. Not in sadness, in satisfaction, in triumph. She had done it. Eleanor was dead, and Victoria had won. Then the mask was back in place, and she was crying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her designer purse. "I can't believe this. I just spoke to her yesterday. She seemed to be doing better. Robert is still in Singapore. Oh God, I have to call him. He'll be devastated." "Would you like to see her?" Patricia asked. "To say goodbye? The body is still here in the morgue, waiting for the family to make arrangements." "Yes," Victoria said, sniffling. "Yes, I'd like that. But first I need to make some calls. Is there a private room I can use?" Patricia directed her to the same family consultation room where I had overheard Victoria plotting with her lawyer Frank. I waited until Victoria was inside, then I positioned myself outside the door again, this time with my phone ready, recording audio through the crack. Victoria wasted no time. I heard her dial, heard the ringing, heard a man's voice answer. Frank, the lawyer. "It's done," Victoria said, her voice completely different now. No crying, no grief. Just cold, businesslike efficiency. "She died this morning. Natural complications from the stroke," they said. "Perfect." "Any problems?" Frank asked. "None." The nurse seemed genuinely sympathetic. "I don't think anyone suspects anything. I'm going to call Robert now, play the grieving wife. He'll catch the first flight home. We should be able to move on the property sales within the week." "What about the cremation?" "I'll push for it immediately," Victoria said. "Say that Eleanor wanted a simple memorial, no fuss. The sooner we get her cremated, the sooner we eliminate any possibility of an autopsy if someone starts asking questions." "Good," Frank said. "And the accounts?" "I'll transfer them tomorrow. I have all the passwords, all the access. By the time Robert figures out what's happening, if he ever does, the money will be long gone. Well hidden." I had heard enough. I had everything I needed. I texted Dr. Patterson. She just confessed everything. Call the police. Now. 10 minutes later, Victoria emerged from the consultation room, her face carefully arranged in an expression of grief. She walked toward the elevators, probably planning to go down to the morgue to view Eleanor's body to keep up appearances. She never made it to the elevator. 2 police officers stepped out from around the corner where they had been waiting, and I watched from the nurse's station as they approached her. "Victoria Thompson?" She turned, surprise and confusion on her face. "Yes? Can I help you?" "Ma'am, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Eleanor Thompson and conspiracy to commit fraud." The confusion deepened. "What?" "There must be some mistake. Eleanor died this morning. I just found out." "Eleanor Thompson is alive, Mrs. Thompson," one of the officers said, pulling out handcuffs. "And we have recorded evidence of you confessing to your plan to kill her and steal her estate. You have the right to remain silent." The look on Victoria's face was something I will never forget. The confusion gave way to shock, then to comprehension, and finally to a rage so pure and intense that it actually scared me. Her eyes darted around the hallway, looking for an escape, looking for someone to blame, and they landed on me. "You," she hissed, struggling against the officers who were now handcuffing her. "You did this. You set me up. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." "You had no right—" "I had every right," I said, stepping forward, my voice steady and cold. "I had the right to protect a patient who couldn't protect herself. I had the right to report a crime. and I had the right to stand up to a woman who was willing to murder her own mother-in-law for money. "She's not my mother," Victoria spat. "She was just a selfish old woman sitting on money that should have been ours. Robert and I worked for that money. We pretended to care about her. We visited her. You tried to kill her," I interrupted. "And now you're going to prison." The officers led Victoria away, still screaming threats and obscenities. The third-floor hallway, usually so busy with nurses and doctors and patients, had gone completely silent. Everyone had stopped to watch the spectacle. When the elevator doors closed on Victoria and the police officers, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from relief. From the knowledge that Eleanor was safe. Dr. Patterson appeared at my side, his hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Sharon," he said quietly. "You saved her life." "We did it," I corrected. "All of us." 2 hours later, Robert Thompson arrived at the hospital, having caught an emergency flight from Singapore when Victoria called him with the fake news of his mother's death. I met him in Dr. Patterson's office, along with Dr. Patterson and Margaret Chen, the hospital's legal counsel. We told him everything. His wife's plan, the attempted murder, the recorded confession, the arrest. He sat there in stunned silence, his world crumbling around him, and when we finished, he looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "My mother," he said hoarsely. "Can I see her? Is she really alive?" "She's alive," I said gently. "And she's been asking for you." I took him up to the 5th floor, to the room where Eleanor was waiting. When he entered and saw his mother sitting up in bed, very much alive, he broke down completely. He fell to his knees beside her bed, took her left hand in both of his, and sobbed. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what she was planning. Mom, I'm so sorry." Eleanor squeezed his hand, and though she still couldn't speak more than a few sounds, the love in her eyes said everything. She forgave him. I left them alone, giving them privacy for their reunion, and went back to the 3rd-floor nurses' station where this had all started. Patricia was there, filling out paperwork, and she looked up at me with something like awe. "Sharon," she said, "everyone's talking about what you did. You're a hero." I shook my head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a nurse who did what needed to be done." But inside, I felt different. I felt like maybe, for the first time in my 40-year career, I had truly made a difference in a way that mattered. I hadn't just provided medical care. I had saved a life in the most fundamental way possible. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, police interviews, and media attention. The story of Victoria Thompson's attempted murder of her mother-in-law made headlines across Atlanta and eventually national news. It became a cautionary tale about elder abuse, about the dangers of giving too much power to family members without oversight, about the importance of advocates for vulnerable patients. Victoria was charged with attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Her lawyer Frank was charged as an accomplice. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded confessions, the tampered IV bag that the lab confirmed had been injected with a drug cocktail designed to cause respiratory failure, the financial records showing Victoria's unauthorized access to Eleanor's accounts. She was eventually convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Frank got 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. Eleanor made a remarkable recovery. With intensive physical and speech therapy, she regained most of her mobility. Her speech never fully returned to normal. She still struggled with certain words and spoke more slowly, but she could communicate. And most importantly, she could tell her own story. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, Eleanor was released from the rehabilitation facility and moved into a beautiful assisted living apartment with full-time care. Robert had divorced Victoria and sought full custody of his 2 children. He visited his mother every single day without fail. On my last day of work before retirement, Eleanor came to the hospital to say goodbye. She walked into the third-floor nurse's station with her cane, looking stronger than I had ever seen her, and she hugged me tight. "Thank you," she said, her speech slow but clear. "You saved my life." "You saved yourself," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "You fought hard enough to give us time. You trusted me when you had every reason to give up." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to have this." Inside was a check for $100,000. I gasped. "Eleanor, I can't accept this. I was just doing my job." "No," she said firmly. "You did more. You risked everything. Please." I looked at Robert, who was standing behind his mother with a smile. He nodded. "Mom insists. And honestly, Sharon, you deserve it. You gave us our mother back." I accepted the check, though it felt strange to take money for something I would have done anyway. But I knew it wasn't really about the money. It was about Eleanor reclaiming her power, her ability to make her own decisions, to choose how she wanted to express her gratitude. That night, I had dinner with Eleanor, Robert, and his 2 children at a restaurant in Buckhead. The children, 10-year-old Michael and 12-year-old Sarah, asked me questions about nursing, about the hospital, about what their grandmother had been like when she was sick. "Was Grandma scared?" Sarah asked, her young face serious. I thought about how to answer, then decided on the truth. Yes, she was scared, very scared, but she was also incredibly brave. She found a way to tell me what was happening even though she couldn't speak, and she never gave up fighting. Michael looked at his grandmother with new respect. "You're like a superhero, Grandma." Eleanor smiled, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "No, Sharon is the superhero." But I wasn't a superhero. I was just a nurse who had paid attention, who had trusted her instincts, who had refused to look away when something felt wrong. 5 years later, I still think about Eleanor Thompson almost every day. I think about the fear in her eyes when she first squeezed my hand to tell me she was scared. I think about Victoria's cold calculation, her willingness to murder for money. I think about how close we came to failing, to letting Eleanor become just another statistic, another elderly patient who died naturally when really they were killed by someone they trusted. I started this YouTube channel, Voices of Nurse Sharon, to share stories like Eleanor's, because I realized in all my years of nursing that these stories need to be told. The patients who can't speak for themselves need someone to give them a voice. The families who are being abused need to know there are people watching, people who care, people who will fight for them. Not every story has a happy ending. I've seen plenty of cases where the bad guys won, where the system failed, where patients died alone and forgotten. But Eleanor's story gives me hope. It reminds me that sometimes, if we pay attention, if we listen to our instincts, if we have the courage to stand up for what's right, we can make a difference. Eleanor is 81 now, still living independently in her assisted living apartment, still sharp as a tack despite the lingering effects of the stroke. She volunteers at a literacy program 3 days a week, teaching adults how to read. She stays in touch with me, calling every few weeks to check in, to share news about her grandchildren, to remind me that I'm always welcome to visit. And every time I see her name on my phone, I'm reminded of that night in the hospital when I stood outside the consultation room and heard Victoria planning her murder. I'm reminded of the choice I made in that moment, to step up, to get involved, to risk everything to save a woman I barely knew. I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Robert rebuilt his life after the divorce. He moved his children to a smaller house, something they could afford on his salary alone without Victoria's spending. He told me once that the whole experience taught him what really matters in life. Not the big house in Buckhead or the private schools or keeping up appearances, but the people you love and who genuinely love you back. Michael and Sarah see their grandmother every weekend. They bring her flowers, tell her about school, play card games with her in the common room of her assisted living facility. They're good kids, growing up with an understanding that family is about love and respect, not about money or obligation. As for me, I used part of Eleanor's gift to take that trip to Paris I had always dreamed about. I spent 2 weeks wandering the streets, visiting museums, eating at sidewalk cafes, and thinking about my life and career. It was the first time in 40 years that I wasn't thinking about patients or hospital schedules or medical emergencies. But even in Paris, I couldn't stop being a nurse. One afternoon, I was sitting in a cafe near Notre Dame when I heard a woman cry out. An elderly man had collapsed on the sidewalk, clutching his chest, his face gray with pain. Without thinking, I was out of my seat and by his side in seconds, checking his pulse, loosening his collar, instructing someone in broken French to call an ambulance. The French paramedics arrived quickly, and the man was rushed to the hospital. A young woman who had been with him, his granddaughter I later learned, thanked me profusely in broken English, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my grandfather," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you." I smiled and patted her hand. I'm a nurse. It's what we do. That moment in Paris, helping a stranger on a sidewalk halfway around the world, reinforced what I had learned from Eleanor's case. Being a nurse isn't just a job. It's not something you can turn off when your shift ends or when you retire. It's a calling, a way of seeing the world, a commitment to protecting those who need protection. I came back from Paris with a renewed sense of purpose. That's when I decided to start this channel, to share the stories from my 40 years at St. Luke's, to give voice to the patients who couldn't speak for themselves. Some people have asked me if I ever regret getting involved in Eleanor's case, if I ever wish I had just done my job and left the family drama to someone else. The answer is simple. Not for 1 second. Yes, it was risky. Yes, I could have lost my nursing license. Yes, Victoria's lawyer tried to file complaints against me, though they were all eventually dismissed. But I look at Eleanor now, living her life, spending time with her grandchildren, volunteering at the literacy program, and I know that every risk was worth it. I think about all the Eleanor Thompsons out there, in hospitals and nursing homes and private residences, trapped in bodies that won't obey or minds that are failing, vulnerable to family members who see them as obstacles or ATMs instead of people deserving of dignity and respect. And I hope that by sharing these stories, by shining a light on what can happen when we don't pay attention, when we don't listen, when we don't act, maybe I can prevent other Victorias from succeeding. Because the truth is, Victoria almost got away with it. If I hadn't been paying attention, if I hadn't trusted Eleanor's hand squeeze, if I hadn't been willing to break rules and risk my career, Eleanor would be dead. Victoria would be living in Eleanor's house, spending Eleanor's money, raising her children with blood money, and no one would have ever known it was murder. That's the scary part. That's what keeps me up at night. Not the cases I saved, but the ones I might have missed. The patients I cared for over 40 years who seemed to decline naturally, but maybe, just maybe, had a Victoria in their life. I'll never know for sure. And that uncertainty is something I've had to make peace with. But I do know this. From the moment I met Eleanor Thompson in room 304, from the moment she squeezed my hand and told me she was scared, I was all in. I wasn't going to let her down. And I didn't. 5 years later, that's what I'm most proud of. Not the media attention or the thanks or even Eleanor's generous gift. I'm proud that when it mattered most, when a patient needed an advocate, I showed up. I did the hard thing. I took the risk. That's what being a nurse means to me. It's not just about administering medications and checking vital signs and following doctor's orders. It's about seeing the whole person, understanding their vulnerabilities, and standing up for them when they can't stand up for themselves. Eleanor's case changed me. It was the culmination of everything I had learned in 40 years, but it also taught me new lessons about courage, about trusting your instincts, about the importance of never looking away from injustice even when it's easier, safer, and more professionally prudent to do so. I hope her story inspires you the way it continues to inspire me. I hope it makes you pay attention to the elderly people in your life, to ask questions, to notice warning signs, to be an advocate when advocacy is needed. And most of all, I hope it reminds you that one person can make a difference. One nurse who paid attention. One patient who fought hard enough to communicate. One doctor who believed. One team that worked together to stop a murder. We saved Eleanor Thompson. And in doing so, we proved that goodness can triumph over evil, that justice can prevail, that sometimes the good guys win. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.